All yours. Thanks, Christian, once again.
All right, thanks for the invite. And I will try to make this a mixture of entertainment and information passing. I'm looking forward to arguing over some of the details. So let me situate where I'm coming from and the problem of practice. I generally like research to have some plausible story about why the world should care about this work. I've been situating it in the problem of the role of writing in education. And coming from it both on a learning to write side, like everyone should be a good writer. If you look at many reports out there, it's very important to being a successful college student at the undergraduate level, at the master's level, and at the PhD level. And there's some interesting work showing from some machine learning that it's actually a hidden bottleneck to advanced coursework, that students who in the first year where they often are failing, it looks like writing doesn't matter that much, but once they get to the more advanced coursework, suddenly there's a surprise, and they're struggling in their advanced coursework because this is the first time they're being pushed on being serious writers. It's also really emphasized today in industry. Many companies report that the people they're hiring are way below where they need to be in terms of writing, and they're needing to do extra training on communication skills. And then even if you're successful in the entry-level positions you get, if you're not a good writer, this will be a bottleneck to your career advancement up at the upper levels. And this includes in people getting computing degrees or AI degrees. If you are an amazing AI person, if you are a terrible writer, you will experience pain down the road in that regard. And then there's the writing to learn side of things, that no matter what you are learning, including coding, writing about your discipline is an important part of becoming really strong in that discipline. So, from both sides, the goal and the way of learning, writing is really quite important. And the reason I'm emphasizing that is currently, if you look at education sort of broadly, we're in a terrible position. So many teachers avoid assigning writing as like the big project, teaching writing or using writing in writing to learn kinds of ways. And the problem is old, right? So here's a nice picture from a long time ago, but anybody who teaches a medium to large course, they can really empathize with this picture. In your heart of hearts, should there have been another writing assignment that would be better for the students? And people say yes. Why did I not give another writing assignment? And then look at the picture here on the right. That's the reason. And it's a bottleneck around feedback. If I give them something to write, I need to give them feedback, and I don't have the time to give everybody feedback. So that's the bottleneck. There's room in the curriculum to have students spend time writing, but there's not room in my life for me to give feedback. And a number of reports of high schools, middle schools, universities, there's not a lot of writing being assigned. And it's just been going down. As course size, as teaching loads go up, writing is the first thing to be thrown under the bus. And there's huge sources of inequity here. If you go to a fancy place like Carnegie Mellon, where the number of graduate students, TAs per class is high and the number of students per course is low, they're still willing to give writing assignments. But when you go to public or then less well-funded public, the amount of writing assignments go down. And if you look at in high schools, the median number of writing assignments given to students per quarter in their English classes for the low-income schools is 0. They do 0 writing, even in their English class, and then never mind all of those other topics. So this bottleneck of feedback is a really important social problem for us to work on. Okay, so what are some ways forward? Here, I want to talk about me versus the rest of you. So, even though we're on the face of it pretending to be friends, really we're kind of frenemies of sorts, where in my work, I propose peer feedback as the solution. I'm just gonna get a whole bunch of students to give each other feedback in a powerful way. And most of you coming from AI would say, well, we'll just get the computer to give feedback. We're just gonna automate the feedback and we'll replace the teacher that way. And so I wanna now talk about this competition between your idea and my idea, and suggest there may be some ways that we can be friends and actually work together. Okay, so let me give you an example of this competition, one that I was part of and has a little CMU story in it. We worked on students writing advanced placement English essays. They were practicing for the high stakes assessment at the end of the year. In the US, about 500,000 students write this kind of essay that I have on the screen each year. You read a page passage and you're supposed to analyze what's going on in that passage and write an analysis about the craft of this passage. And the students produce a one-page essay that's doing this analysis that looks like this on the screen. And the way that we set up our competition is we had several different sources of graders here. One is we had 5 peers from inside the class give ratings of the documents. And here I'm showing the interface from Peerceptive, where you've got the PDF document that you were assigned anonymously, and then you've got some commenting prompts and some rating selections. This is a somewhat older interface that was used at the time of the study, but you get a sense of how we structured peers giving each other feedback and done in an anonymous way. And we did this with about 1,200 students coming from 26 schools across 12 states. So this was like a big study. And then we also had the teacher do the grading, and then we had an automated essay scoring system, which was using the LightSide technology that was developed by Elijah Mayfield from CMU. He developed the core ideas as he was a graduate student at CMU. And then his company was acquired by Turnitin .com, and they now offer that as a service in all sorts of settings, including to the College Board. So among the many questions we had is, well, which of these approaches can do a reasonable job of grading these essays? If we could have peers do this reliably, then we could just have more practice sessions. We wouldn't always need to rely on the teacher. And then a computer-based system could be another possible way of just getting more practice in. We had a whole bunch of outside experts evaluate all the documents, and then we correlated the peers, the teacher scores, and the automated essay scoring system against the experts. So this is the Pearson correlation. And it was basically identical, but I would, I get to celebrate since this is a competition and I'm representing one of the teams. The student mean was actually the most successful by just a hair overall. But really, all of them were acceptably strong. You could have said, okay, the automated system is just as good as teachers and students are just as good as teachers. Either is an acceptable replacement. So probably a more fair judgment would be on this metric. It was kind of a tie. But there was another thing going on that I want to point to, which reveals a common challenge in automated essay scoring is some simple things totally throw them for a loop. So I'll give you the example. At the time, in the real advanced placement exam, students, back in those days, you were allowed to physically go somewhere, and they sat down in the rooms and they hand wrote essays. And so for the purpose of this study, half the students hand wrote an essay and then scanned it and had that done for peer review, and half of the students typed an essay and submitted, a PDF, a typed essay. And here are the average scores given by the peers, the teacher, the automated essay scoring system, and the experts for all the typed essays versus the handwritten essays. And in 3 of the 4 cases, it was basically the same. The experts, the teachers, and the students, they thought the typed essays and the handwritten essays were about equally strong. But the automated essay scoring system thought the typed essays were a lot better. It was fooled. So does anyone have an idea for why the automated essay scoring system thought typed essays?
One clarification, was the handwritten essay fed as somebody type it on computer and then feed it to the system, or just feed it?
Oh, yeah. Somebody, they got rid of the handwriting for the automated essay scoring system. Somebody typed it up and sent the automated system the fully typed thing. It didn't have to do handwriting recognition. That would have been a cruel and unusual punishment.
Maybe the automated ones were much longer. I mean, the typed one were much longer.
Yes, that is what happened. There was more fluency. Kids these days almost never handwrite anything, and so their handwriting is slow and their typing is fast. And it is a known feature that automated essay scoring systems overweight length. It's a reliable predictor, and so they emphasize it a lot as one of their features. And so when a superficial thing changes length, they get fooled that the essays are then therefore necessarily stronger. So it sort of points to a general thing that automation relies on superficial correlations, a certain degree in ways that humans don't. Okay, so now I want to zoom out. So that was one example of the competition, and I want to look at the feedback here and the different roles AI could play. And I'm going to, at this point, talk about 4 that are interestingly different to me. And then at the end of the talk, I'll get into a 5th use case. So the first is the one that we've already talked about, and that's evaluating document quality. And this is now very commonly found in companies working at scale out there. You know, in some ways, it's so popular that we wouldn't call it AI anymore. You know, whenever things become popular, it's no longer considered AI by the fancy pants people. And it's very routine. The GMATs are now scored by computer. A lot of AP exams are scored by computer. It's kind of interesting from a meta perspective. It's like now broadly done, even though it remains very controversial. So, you know, here I'm pointing to an example of faculty getting very angry when they hear that essays are being scored by computers now instead of by experts. And in general, students find it controversial, parents find it controversial, faculty find it controversial, newspaper writers find it controversial. It's so weird to be in a situation where most people think this is a terrible idea, and it is now basically the standard. It is so commonly done, but in a stealth fashion. You know, when you take one of these exams, it's hard for you to find any information about who's actually going to score these things. They hide the fact that it's being done by a computer. Okay, so that's one example. Another example that's much more bleeding edge for AI is the feedback given to the student. So I'm typing an essay, and it's not just about giving me a score, but I need some concrete advice of which part of my essay is problematic. What should I make as a change? You know, this is sort of the more learning-oriented aspects of the feedback system. And here, I think there's a ton of data that shows that getting feedback from peers is quite successful. And there's very little evidence showing that getting feedback from these automated systems is successful. By and large, this is still a thing to be reached by AI systems. So here's one that's commercially available and used almost zero because it's pretty, but it's often not perceived as actually very helpful. Another interesting example is related to evaluating feedback quality. And here is where it goes from competition. The last 2 examples that I gave, evaluating documents, giving feedback, that's the competitive. You know, we could either use AI or we could use peers, and we could say which one is a better source. Now we're getting to something that brings the 2 of them together to collaborate. So a peer gives feedback, and the AI gives the peer a grade for how useful that feedback is, how high quality was that feedback. So here's an example by some colleagues at North Carolina State University where they look at the feedback and they check, is the feedback covering the correct topics? Is it the right style of comment? Is it the right tone? Is it too harsh? Is it, only positives? Is it the right volume? Is it copying other people's comments? So these are things that AI could do to make the peers have higher quality by holding them accountable to a standard. And then that would allow teachers or instructors to trust this a little more. They wouldn't feel like they need to supervise all of the comments. And that's often a point of contention with instructors implementing it. Well, I didn't have time to give feedback, and I certainly don't have time to look at everyone else's feedback and make sure they don't say anything stupid. So here is an automation that could address that kind of problem. And then another variation of that is not just a matter of holding scores, but to give feedback to the peer before the comment releases. So they could look over the comments given by the peers and then point to particular areas. So, it's a little too harsh over here, or you haven't covered all of the topics. And so feedback can be generated. I want to give another example of that with some colleagues at Pitt. Diane Littman and her grad students have been working on this for a while, starting with some work with me. And I wanted to point out a couple of things here. One, the thing that they were automatically detecting in here leveraged some research that I had done on peer feedback, where I had done some studies to see what kind of peer feedback is actually more helpful. What leads students to make changes in their documents? What leads students to improve? And one of the things that we had shown is being specific. Give a concrete example. Here's a problem, here's a general problem. For example, on page 2, you did blah. If you just describe the general problem without the example, students often have no idea what you're talking about. Instead of just being a complainer, give some constructive suggestions. Here's a problem, and one way you might fix it is, what if you added, a transition at this point, something like that. And so based on that research that I had done, they then added some NLP detectors to look for the absence of those things. Look for comments where they described a problem, but they didn't show where the problem had occurred. Or look for where they describe a problem and they don't give a constructive solution. In the interface that they did, they used a nice strategy, which is more in the hinting direction than in the assuming the AI is correct sort of direction. And that's important because natural language processing at the specific example level is often, in that in-between level of accuracy where, a lot of errors still occur. So in this interface, it pointed out, here's the thing you probably have to fix, but it gave students the option of saying, no, I think you're wrong. My thing is correct, and I'm not going to make any changes in this. Okay. So those are 4 kinds of ways that AI could play a role: too competitive and too collaborative. And now I want to pop up and think about this in a different way. And that is to sort of frame it as an ethical thing. So rather than what could we do and just make it a technical problem, is to ask what should we do? Because not all things that can be done should be done. Okay, So here's the framework that I've been using to think about this, and I'm really interested to hear about your feedback on that. I think about it in two dimensions. One dimension is where is the accuracy at this point in time? You know, when you're publishing a paper, the framework I find is very binary. It's like better than random or better than existing. Solution is the level that we use. If you can do better than, you know, current best in class, congratulations, you get a publication and maybe a PhD. But from a real world perspective, you know, in the uses of automation, sometimes better than random is still totally unusable. So, you know, and then another distinction I'd make is okay to like fully automate and just say, this is the way it is, people, or to say, we think the system thinks this might be a problem, but we're not going to assert we're sure that it's a problem, you know, sort of a hinting or flagging approach. The other dimension that I want to talk about is the impact dimension. And there are three levels that I want to distinguish. So at the top is like a very high bar. Even if we could have humans do this, having the computer do it is even better than that. So in all circumstances, we'd want to replace the human. Then the middle level is, it's not better than a human, but often humans are in not sufficient supply. We don't have enough TA resources. We don't have enough instructor resources to give feedback at all, or not in a timely fashion. You know, often learning is improved when you can give quick feedback as opposed to like a month later feedback. And then the bottom level is, this is just a bad idea. We're actively harming individuals by inserting automation here, by inserting an AI solution here. Okay, so now I want to look back at some of those use cases that I talked about from this framework to make an argument about things that we could do but shouldn't, and things that it would really be great to collaborate and make more of. Okay, so let's start with the two cases we already had, and that is essay scoring, or let's start in the top right, in the case of essay scoring with high volume testing. So AP exam given to, you know, hundreds of thousands of students, you know, any of those high stakes exams that's given to a ton of people. The technology is now at the point where you can build a classifier that reliably grades those things better than humans, or at least as good as humans, and much faster. I think that's a nice simple case. You know, you might have some ethical qualms. It feels weird, but it's really from like bizarre biases that we have about AI. There's no evidence that anyone's being harmed by that automatic grading process. And I think there that the ship has left, the train has left the station, whatever your metaphor is, and that's perfectly reasonable. I don't think anyone's being harmed by it. The other case is essay scoring for low volume testing. So like maybe you're teaching a course to 50 students and you'd like to give some essay questions and have an automated scoring system for that, you know, one-off thing that you've made. I think we're far from having that be highly reliable by machine scoring. there's just not enough training data to get a reliable classifier there. At best, you can do some hinting. And so for that reason, I think that one's just going to be, it's better than nothing, but it would be better if there was a human doing that. Okay. So now let me turn to some more interesting cases. I think those are relatively straightforward. And that is the essay feedback case. So I'm not just giving a score, I'm going to tell the student, here specifically is what you did right or wrong, and here specifically is what you should change, how you could improve. And there, I'd want to argue that even though it might be, in the case of high volume stuff, okay to hint and flag that it's on that accuracy dimension, okay, it's actively harmful. And let me tell you why I think that's true. The first point is that when we ask students to write a paper to their peers, that they know that their peers are going to be the ones grading it, it turns out they write better papers. The putting peers as the audience is actually helpful for people writing stronger documents, because they then think about writing as a communication act. When you write an essay to a computer or to a teacher, you do a very weird kind of writing in which you don't think about what do they know and what do they not know. How can I explain it? You're writing to an expert telling them only things they already know. And in fact, they penalize you if you tell them something that they didn't already know, by and large. And so it's a bad kind of writing. So that's the first point. The second point is when you get multiple peer feedback, so multiple peers each giving you feedback, people take that kind of feedback much more seriously, and they're more likely to improve. So we've done a number of studies of these things. So we find big changes to essays only happen when multiple peers all are commenting and are pointing out why this needs to change. And only in that case do you get significant change. So that multiplicity is helpful. But most importantly, and here is the main thing about why I'm really opposed to having computers take on the task of giving feedback, is that the act of giving feedback is a big learning opportunity. So this is a case where students learn from not the receiving side of things, but from the giving side of things. And yes, we might eventually get an AI system that could be very competent at giving feedback, like it would be accurate and helpful, but we would then be taking away a learning opportunity from the students. And that's the part that I'm really opposed to. Okay, so now let me come back to this. So just to remind you, so I think on the accuracy side, essay feedback is currently at the okay to hint flag side. For the high volume where we can have lots of training, it's at the unusable accuracy on the low volume cases. There's really no systems out there that are getting substantive use because the feedback's terrible. And even if we could fix that, even if we could fix for both cases and move them all the way to the right, I still would argue that we shouldn't do it. We could do it, but we shouldn't do it because we're taking away a learning opportunity from the students. All right. So that's in the competitive space. what about the examples of giving feedback on feedback and the feedback quality scoring? So here I would argue that the feedback quality scoring, the existing systems, they've got lots of dimensions to them now. Each one of them is maybe a little bit noisy, but on average, they pull a pretty good signal out, and they can reliably say, this set of feedback was good, and this set of feedback was mediocre, and that can provide an accountability layer that would ease acceptance for doing this sort of thing. And that could be helpful. The reason that I put that feedback quality scoring in the better than nothing side and not really better than human is the effect on learning is relatively indirect overall. You know, we're going to improve acceptance, but we're not really going to beef up the learning opportunity, because just the score doesn't really help get people better at, you know, making big improvements in their quality. Whereas having a teacher look at your comment and give you some very expert-like feedback on that, or somebody giving you feedback on feedback is going to be helpful, whereas just the score is too indirect to influence learning outcomes. Whereas the feedback on feedback itself, whether done by peers or done by a computer system, I think that's a kind of really useful learning opportunity for AI and peers to collaborate. It can be pervasively applied. Every single comment, you get feedback very quickly, and you can make adjustments, and it reduces the noise in the overall system in an important way. Students find it very annoying when some of the feedback they get is not well thought through, superficial. They feel like there's, you know, they can't trust the system overall if some of the feedback is superficial. They feel like there's a violation of a social contract. I'm giving, you know, and helping others, and here's this asshole who's not doing their job, so now I'm going to stop trying. There's just a whole bunch of reasons why that kind of a feedback thing will keep the whole approach to be a much more healthy ecosystem. All right, and now I want to leave a little bit of time so then we can get to open questions on one last fifth category that I think would be an interesting collaboration between AI and peer feedback. And that's a teacher dashboard for peer feedback systems. So in peer feedback just involves a ton of data that's going on. So it's not just individually each little interaction that you might look at, but just getting a sense of the whole of what's happening and where should I strategically intervene and which parts of it is working and which parts of it is not working. There, I think there's a real opportunity for machine learning and AI to look across the data set and tell the teacher where they need to improve in this overall approach. So let me give you a concrete example of that. So in a relatively big data set that I had, where we had peer feedback being done at 38 institutions across 97 courses, where not only did peers grade things, but also the teacher or the teaching assistants also graded things. And there we could look at under what circumstances could we trust the peer ratings. You know, on average, I showed you it's pretty good in that early case, but not every instance did it work out well. Sometimes peers did crazy things and sometimes they did sensible things. So how could you tell are there metrics that you could use to know whether in this course, on this assignment, are the peer grades trustworthy? And it turns out the strongest predictor of the validity of the peer ratings was their inter-rater reliability. When peers agreed with each other, the peer rating also agreed with the instructor rating. And there were some other things that we could use. We could build a fancier classifier, but even just that one source where students agreeing with each other could be fed back to the instructor as a pretty good indicator that you can trust what the students did. And in fact, we've built such a feedback mechanism into Perceptive where an instructor gets one of these bar graphs, and each of these bars is one of their rating dimensions. So in this assignment, we have all of these different rating dimensions, and the reliability is being shown of each of the rating dimensions. So on the far right, the overall score, students agreed with each other at a very high level. On the quality of the thesis, they agreed with each other at a very high level. But on some of the dimensions, the agreement was lower. And we color flag these based on that other research that we did, that when things are up this high, you should be able to trust it. But when things are down this low, they often are really misunderstanding what needs to be improved. And those are things that you should now work with on your students. This particular aspect of the larger pie they don't understand, and you can improve your instruction over time by improving these aspects. And that's something that it would take a long time for a teacher to look through all of the comments and figure that out. And that's a nice place for automation to come in. Okay, so just to summarize now that we're at the 45-minute mark, I think we have some places where we're in competition. So the red cases I've indicated here. And in some of those competitions, I think it's fine if automatic wins the day. So an essay scoring for high volume testing, I have no problems with that. Some of the other cases, even if you could get better on the automation, I think you shouldn't do it. I think it's misguided to spend a lot of effort on those directions because you're taking away an important learning opportunity. And I instead would encourage in this green zone where we can work together, where you're applying AI to a peer feedback system and making that learning opportunity a better learning opportunity. Okay, so let me stop there and take some general questions.
Okay, people can raise their hand or unmute themselves and ask the question. Why don't you go for it?
Yeah. Hi, Chris. Vanati here. Very nice talk. I'm just learning about your research now. I had a question regarding the fact that to me, it seems like almost always more feedback is better than less. I don't know. From your work, it might show otherwise. But I'm just curious to know, why is it you wouldn't want both system feedback plus teacher feedback, and then observe how students react to the different man-machine kind of differences in feedback?
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess two things related to that. One has to do, students do get overwhelmed with too much feedback, so there's kind of some diminishing returns on that. And the other has to do with kind of how things are adopted. often there's kind of a competition from the teacher's perspective about how many different technologies will I take on in my teaching. And I've seen that in practice, people pick, I'm either going to do peer feedback or I'm going to do automated feedback because it takes some effort to figure out how I'm going to implement these things, and we don't have a robust system that brings them all together. So, you know, so you're right, there could be a thing down the road that brings them together. And some people have proposed peers first, and then a computer reorganizes the feedback and sort of summarizes it as one possible combination. And maybe you'll have other ideas for how to bring them organically together.
The other question I had also was related to the student giving themselves feedback, because oftentimes that seems to be a very big motivating factor, right? What if they were able to compile the peer feedback and summarize that and provide the meta feedback, if you will, for themselves?
Yeah, that, you know, I think that's a powerful thing. I have not seen any studies where they did that activity. And I think there's all sorts of variations of peer feedback with technology support that have still need much more exploration. So for example, team-based peer feedback. So rather than 5 people independently, each giving comments, a group of 4 or 5 people together coming and commenting creates interesting learning opportunities and interesting opportunities for AI to support the process. You know, sometimes teams do things that is terrible to each other and as a product, and AI could go into that and make sure it's a functional team doing the peer feedback.
Awesome. Great. Thanks.
Roger?
Hi, Chris. Thanks for the talk. That was really great, and it's great to see you know, so many results from studies and almost a meta review of what's going on. I had a really practical question, which is that I tried to do some peer reviewing in a mostly online course, and my sense was that some students were diligently, you know, trying to give good feedback, but you know, being students, the expedient thing to do is just kind of check off that everything's good and pretend like you didn't notice, and you save a lot of time that way, and you probably don't get busted, or at least you have a good excuse. And so it was almost like the results were kind of bimodal, that some were accurate and some were just high. Even the accurate ones tended to be high, I mean, because they just, you know, that was just right. And so I wonder if you have any suggestions on how to counter this tendency to just say, you know, everything's okay, and do a quick rating job.
Yeah. Well, there's a paper whose title about this problem is "Awesome Dude," because that's like a very common review that in the non-accountability situation students will do. This is where accountability mechanisms are really important. So in perceptive, the system keeps track of the rating accuracy. So if you're not rating accurately, you get penalized. And the authors give a rating for how helpful the comments were. And it turns out being told everything is great is not perceived as very helpful. People want to improve, and they're gonna penalize people for superficial positives. But this is also the opportunity where fancier systems could come in to, you know, act as a judge of, is there depth here, flagging people who are consistently giving superficial reviews. You know, practically you can use my system, or if you get excited, you could write a classifier that would penalize students for giving sloppy reviews and bust out your own AI.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Nihar?
Hi, Chris. Thanks for the great talk. You know, a very related application is the peer review of scientific research, right? Peer review of the papers that we submit. And in that, like, I guess not everything that you found here holds. For example, if there's a disagreement, it may still be high quality, but just because two people have very different subjective opinions. So I'm just curious to know your thoughts on what may or may not extend from what you presented into this domain of peer review of scientific research.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess I would say that peer review in journals or conferences, a good editor picks people who are, you know, purposefully coming from different perspectives, right? And so if they all agreed, you would probably be a bad editor because you were trying to get, you know, different perspectives on things. And I think there, the indicator of quality would not be like the inter-rater reliability, but rather things like are looked at here. Did the reviewers cover the topics they were asked to cover? Is there a reasonable quantity? You know, when you get terrible reviews, like in the sense of not it hurts you because all reviews hurt you, but in the sense of, you know, the reviewer didn't really do their job. It's when they don't engage with the substance, they just complain about superficial things, or they write very short things. I think we could use those sorts of classifiers to flag bad reviewing. And I think it could be done somewhat reliably. I just think peer review in journals and in conferences is like so close to our hearts that we would be afraid to make any changes to the system. So I predict that it'll be a while, even though we could and should make changes there. I predict nonetheless it'll be a while before we make those sorts of changes.
Chris, I have a quick question. Thanks so much for that talk. In the study where you showed the difference between where you flagged with red, orange, and green, whether the peers agreed or not.
Oh yeah.
Were those features discovered automatically? In other words, do you know of systems that might actually do scaffolding after the fact?
That is, I think, the bleeding edge right now. I think we're coming to learn what are some features in the student responses that are indicating problem type 1, problem type 2. You know, is it, for example, nobody understood what this dimension really is about? Or is it there are two different understandings of this dimension, and, you know, half the students have understanding A and half understanding B, and they really should have understanding A and B. So, you know, that's a bottom-up thing. There's also like common problems with a rubric. I occasionally see a rubric where the levels are A, B, C, D, EF, like no information at all. And, you know, not surprisingly, that doesn't tend to produce reliable. You've just said it goes, you know, it's a number. But we still have work to do to look at common patterns of the less crazy things that, you know, I think, like, how long should a rubric be? There's probably a Goldilocks principle there. Like, too short, you haven't given enough information; too long, and people forget what they're supposed to do when they get to the third level because there's so much information.
Maybe I can ask a related question. Do you have any advice on designing these rubrics before or after the grading fact? Because sometimes I find it's better for me to review the work before I decide on these common problems that I've identified and then put the rubric out there.
Yeah,
but I understand that there might be an argument that having the rubric is better for the students to go about their work.
So the most common reason that inter-rater reliability is low is that everybody got a high score. And that's because you didn't really think about what students would struggle at, or you created a rubric that was covered only obvious problems that no one would make. And you need, you know, you gave an undergraduate rubric to a graduate class, right? You need to have a higher level.
Right.
And looking at examples usually removes that problem. You know, you look at what students are really doing and then come up with the rubric around that. And so I usually see the first time people do it, they have not good intuitions, then they look at the student performance, and the next time they give the class, they're in a much better position to do this.
I have one more question.
Sure.
Yeah, so oftentimes the writing, obviously the grading of the evaluation of a writing depends on who is reading it. So so one of the things, and to me, as I've observed kids do these things, they are usually want to convey what is in their heart. And they try to get whatever is out there into the essay within following the rubrics and following what the teachers ask them to do, right? So my question to you is, how do educators think about how to communicate to the students what kinds of audiences they should be writing to, and how will that impact how we grade them and so on?
Yeah. So I want to point to this study where we found that when students wrote to their peers rather than to TAs, they wrote better papers because they started thinking about the audience. The peer is like a meaningful audience in the way that a TA is not. In general, declaring the audience and making one of the reviewing criteria be around, is this sensible to the audience? So, you know, there's research showing even 5-year-olds know how to think about adapting a message to an audience. The problem is not that students are lacking it. The problem is we didn't tell them what the audience was and how to focus on that audience. I mean, you know, sometimes you might name an audience that they have never heard of and they don't know how to think about that audience. But by and large, the most common problem is we don't tell them what the audience is. So it's no surprise they don't think about the audience.
Right. So in reviews, particularly, the notice, what I've been noticing is that we are trained to write to peers, but actually who you're writing to is the next generation. And the next generation probably doesn't know. So it's actually not even your peers, right? Somebody else is grading your essay, so to speak, or somebody else is grading your work. They probably never heard of all this stuff. They're already in a different way of thinking or a mode of thinking. So how does one make sure that the writing is carrying through across generations? That's how great pieces of literature get written.
Yeah. I think doing more of this peer review in larger classes that have more diversity of students in the class is a great experience about how to write for different kinds of audiences simultaneously. You know, like the great piece convinces the expert and is meaningful to the novice. And classes that have people from different backgrounds forces you to start to work on that. Like, it's really hard to write like that, and you need a lot of practice on being technically accurate and understandable to broader audiences.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah.
All right. Do we have any other question? Okay, great. We had a great number of questions today. Let's thank our speaker once again. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much. It was, I enjoyed it. And if anyone wants to, you know, talk down the road and how we can collaborate, I'd be very interested.
Thank you.